Hello, everyone, and welcome to StrandExplains. So, 6 women out of the 6 million people who are vaccinated with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, as well as 220 people of the 34 million people from the UK and EU who are vaccinated with the AstraZeneca vaccine, were seen to have blood clots. While scary, we want to understand what this means, what the statistics are, and how worried we should be. So, RK, can you get into what the statistics are and what they mean?
Yeah, so 6 women out of 6 million is a very low number, one in a million, literally, right? So if you were to go to the CDC website, you'd see that in the US, on average, 1 out of 2 for every 1,000 people is expected to develop a deep vein thrombosis. That is a severe blood clotting event across 1 year. So 1 out of 2 per 1,000 in a year are expected to develop those serious blood clots, right? So 1 per 1,000 is much higher than 1 per million. Um, However, it is a problem because if there is a causal link between the vaccine and the clot, it merits investigation, right? And why do we think there is a causal link? Um, because in both cases, in both the J&J and the AZ cases, the clotting event occurs between 1 and 2 weeks of vaccination. That's the first point. The second point is that it always manifests with the same symptoms. So, blood clots, typically in the brain, accompanied with a low platelet count. Right? So, it's a very curious, very rare blood clotting event. Such a rare blood clotting event, especially in the brain, can be fatal. So far, no fatalities have been observed with the J&J vaccine. And out of the 34 or so million people who've been vaccinated on the the AZ vaccine, 18 people have died, right? Um, and it's also important to remember that both vaccines have a similar mechanism of action, um, as well as a pattern of clotting. So there is some reason to believe that in a very small percentage of the population that receives the vaccine, there is the probability of a clotting event that occurs between 1 and 2 weeks of vaccination. Um, that is what is currently being investigated. Um, the statement from AstraZeneca in this regard is maybe interesting. Basically, what they're saying is that in the clinical trials, the number of thrombotic events, that is, events where there was a clot observed, the total number of such events was small, and they were in fact lower in the vaccinated group than in the placebo group, or rather in the group that did not receive the vaccine. So in the clinical trial situation, it seemed as though the probability that you would get a clot is lower if you were vaccinated. However, in reality, across the larger cohort of millions of people who've received it, that does not seem to be the case. That's sort of the landscape. Do you know what the reactions have been from regulatory authorities, Sakshi?
Yeah, so maybe just to establish a timeline, especially for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, because this has all happened in the last month or so. So Johnson & Johnson initially got approval in the US on the 27th of February. So literally a month and a half ago. However, last week, they were temporarily suspended by both the FDA and CDC in America. And the South Africa and the EU also paused their rollout. Like we said, it is still currently under investigation, but a lot of the reason for this is due diligence. It's wanting to make sure that everything is right versus knowing for sure something is wrong. So, as Rachel Pelch Lorb, I really hope I'm pronouncing that right, from the NYU School of Global Public Health said, it's incredibly challenging, but to ignore it would have been much worse. And the idea behind this is with this vaccination, with the current magnifying glass that is on these vaccines, it's much better to be transparent and be cautious than to kind of take a step back and be like, yeah, it might have happened, but we don't want to investigate it because we don't want to fearmonger. And so that's really the reason why this pause is happening both in both South Africa, EU, as well as America, and we have to watch the space as it goes forward. Now, like you mentioned, these patterns were also seen in in the AstraZeneca vaccine. And about a month ago, the AstraZeneca vaccine had been paused. However, it was very recently resumed. Vaccinations using the AstraZeneca vaccine were very recently resumed, because what they saw was that while these side effects are possible, the effects of COVID are much, much more fatal, and the risk of COVID is much more fatal. I think another point to bring out is that all the people who have had these side effects are typically between the age of 18 and 48 to 50, so slightly
Right.
younger in age. Now, with this age cohort, the risk of getting COVID is anyway lower, and so you're having a higher bar. Your vaccination is compared to a higher safety bar, and so you really want to be careful. And so I think that's one of the reasons why this pause has happened. What's really important to remember is that this pause is really just a situation of due diligence and being as careful as possible. While this is a developing situation, like we mentioned earlier, the numbers are statistically quite small, which means any single person's chance of getting the blood clots is very low. And so while we should all keep watching what's happening, if and when you get vaccinated, keep in check with yourself, watch yourself for symptoms, fever, whatever it may be. But as of now, I personally don't think it's a cause of concern, just something to watch out for.
I second that. I think we have to keep watching ourselves, and this is just one more vignette in that larger story over the last year or so that has played out.
Exactly. Thanks, RK.
Thank you, Sakshi.